Fantastic. So yes, this is a presentation that Kieran and I and our team has put together on fall protection from residential construction. So today we're going to take the time and talk about fall protection in residential construction industry. There are a number of factors on residential sites that employers must consider when choosing the most effective method for fall protection. So when we talk about fall protection, there may be limited space to work on with multiple trades working in close quarters. These factors can dictate the controls you put in place while working at heights. So with this presentation, we're hoping to provide more information to help workers in the residential factor work safely at heights. So fall protection can be defined as using controls designed to protect people from falling, or if they do fall, to stop them without causing severe injury. So when we look at fall protection, most people might consider fall protection when they're working at heights, but that's not the case. Fall protection can also lead into other aspects like slips, trips, and falls, stepping in open holes, even as far as getting out of a vehicle. Tripping out of your vehicle, that's considered a fall. That's a fall at the same level. So just with knowing that, before we get into too much detail on the different fall protection aspects that are out there and avenues that the residential sector can use to protect from falls, I'd like to turn it over to Annette Goski now to provide some stats on falls from heights. Annette?
Thanks, Curtis. And I promise I don't have a whole bunch of stats to talk about, but I just wanted to give an overall picture of the provincial stats as well as the stats in the B12 rate code. But you can go to the next slide, Curtis.
Sure.
I just want to go back to, why is WorkSafe interested in the injuries that are related to falling from heights? And we are very interested in eliminating the injuries that are caused by falling from heights. We developed and finalized a fatality and serious injury strategy late last year. And part of that exercise in developing the strategy was to look at the statistics and where the data would point us so that we could focus our efforts in order to develop the strategy going forward for those next 3 years. And what we found when we looked at that strategy was 4 areas of focused priorities in the fatality piece. And falling from heights came out as the 5th highest cause of fatalities when we looked at the numbers between 2010 to 2018. Asbestos exposure is the first highest one. Work-related motor vehicle crashes, firefighter cancer exposure, and heart attacks are in there as well. And then falls from heights came into the picture, and we know that falls from heights can be eliminated out of the system. So we put that as one of our primary focuses in our WorkSafe, in our fatality and serious injury strategy for the next 3 years. So to the end of 2021, we will be focusing on these 4 areas. You can go to the next slide, Curtis. So when we looked at putting this into the strategy, we wanted to put in an objective. We want to reduce the falls from heights injuries by 30% from a 2018 baseline year in the province by December 31st, 2021. So some of the things that we've done under this piece of the strategy is we of course work closely with the Saskatchewan Construction Safety Association on building some awareness pieces for this issue. We hosted an industry focus group where we held a focus group, and we included workers, supervisors, safety personnel. We asked large companies, small companies, rural companies, urban companies working in the urban centers to participate in this focus group. And we really wanted to ask the questions, what are the barriers to using fall protection at the work site to eliminate falls from heights? And we got a variety of comments back from the group, and they included things like it takes too long to put on the protective equipment if it's a 5-minute job. We don't feel that we need to put on the fall protection. We're up and down fairly quickly. We also got comments about it creates other hazards when wearing the fall protection. The risk of the task being done isn't properly assessed, and not knowing legal requirements. So the next step in all of this is to really break down those barriers and get to what is the root cause to not wearing that fall protection, which will eliminate the falls from heights for your industry. We also did an awareness campaign last year where we went around to different sites, and we focus on the negative in health and safety, what went wrong, what failed in the system, but what we wanted to do was highlight some of the positives out there and who was working safely. So that was the first piece of that awareness campaign. And we again want to do something like that this year, just to make sure that we don't take our eye off of the falling from heights issue in the province. The next slide, Curtis. Oh, that doesn't look right. Okay, so this, sorry about the slide. I think I might have sent a little bit wrong slide here to Loy, but I will talk about the line in behind there. If you just focus on that green line of the December piece there, this is for the whole provincial picture. Last year in total, we had 798 injuries due to falls from heights. And so that number is quite large in the province, as you can see. This year, in the first 3 months of the year, we were a little bit above that line, but in April, we've dropped a little bit below where we were last year. So that's, to always be below that line is a good thing. That's what we want to see. That second graph there that's on top is just for the B12 rate code. And that is the number of falls every year. Let me just get my own up here. Falls from heights every year from the last 5 years. So in 2015, we saw 80 falls. In 2016, it went to 75. 2017, 67. In 2018, 64, and in 2019, 70. So over those 5 years, the total number of falls in the industry is 356. So as you add them up, it does become quite a large number. And again, falls, the result of a bad fall is a serious injury. It can be a permanent disability for a worker, or it can be a fatality. So really, one of the reasons that we are focusing on this at WorkSafe. So thank you for that.
Absolutely, thanks, Annette. And to continue on with that as well, like you said, falls in the construction industry are one of the leading causes of injury. So when we break down falls, we can break it down into two different categories. That's falls from heights and falls from the same level. So falls from the same level, I touched on that a little bit earlier, and that results to poor housekeeping, holes in the ground, slips and trips. So when we look at that, housekeeping is a big factor of that. But when we look at falls from heights in the residential industry, without the proper controls in place, they can cause serious injury or even death. So the key part of maintaining the workplace safety is understanding what areas pose these risks. So when we look at that, we look at unguarded edges, rooftops, openings in floors, working off ladders. Those are just some examples of working at heights and having those fall hazards. So when we look at that, we want to address that. So like I said, falls from the ground level, we can look at that as uncapped rebar onto nails sticking out of boards and other similar protruding items that can cause injury. Good housekeeping on the site is very important for this reason. The job cleanup phase it takes about 5 to 10 minutes throughout the day. So if you shut your crews down a little bit earlier and give them that time to clean up, you're eliminating quite a few hazards on that job site alone. So it's such an easy task to do to eliminate the risk of your employees getting hurt. It just kind of pays for itself in the end, really. And then from there, we move into the hazard assessment process. So most companies are conducting hazard assessments on typically a daily basis, but that'll be determined on your activities at work. So contacting an advisor, we can help you with that process. All workers must know the hazards present on the job site, as well as how they can be controlled to keep themselves safe. All hazards or situations can lead to falls. The hazards that can lead to falls must be assessed and controlled. As with all hazards, fall protection must start by considering the ways of elimination to reduce the risk of falls. So from there, we move into the hierarchy of controls. So first and foremost, if you have a hazard on site, the best way to control that hazard is by elimination. So just taking that hazard completely out of the picture. From there, you're moving into substitution. And substitution, that's where you're replacing the hazard with something less hazardous, if you can do so. Next is engineering controls. The hazard's not eliminated, but the risk is reduced by isolating the workers from the hazard, okay? And then we move into administrative. That's where you're taking stuff into play, like your work practices, your safe job procedures, your training, and changing the way the work is done, okay? And then of course, your last line of defense is your personal protective equipment, your PPE. So that should be your last line of defense. Not only that, your PPE can be used in conjunction with other methods of the hierarchy of control. So with the hierarchy of control, obviously elimination is the main one. But when we move down the ladder a little bit, we look at the elimination phase and reducing the risk of the falls while trying to install them at heights, okay? So like this, a lot of companies are moving into building the roofs on the ground, eliminating that fall hazard altogether, hiring a crane, and then they crane that roof into place. Now, with that, you are introducing new hazards, but they're easily controllable with control zones around the site, proper spotters, having that person trained in rigging and stuff like that. How to do that job safely comes down to training. So ultimately, like I said, reducing and eliminating is the key factor of the hierarchy of control. So the engineered controls, this is a broad category in residential construction. There's so many different methods that companies can use when it comes to engineered controls. Some of these examples, when we look at them, are the guardrail systems to protect workers from falling against heights, hole coverings, temporary handrails on stairwells, fencing around the job sites to protect the public, like you can see in some of these pictures. There's so many different methods that we can use when we look at the engineered control factor. And then with those examples, it's a task-specific control you're going to put in place. They're not all going to work together. So some more examples of engineered controls. A lot of the times we hear, well, I can't tie, how am I going to tie off to the rafters when I'm standing them? If they fall over, I'm going to go with it. So there's so many different methods out there. And please contact the SCSA if you'd like some more help with this. But a couple of the avenues you can use when standing rafters and things like that is you can use the wall walking scaffolds. These brackets are attached to either the inside or the outside of the walls and give the framer or contractor the ability to place and stand trusses from a safe platform. So as you can see from that picture there, you can actually hang these brackets on the outside of the wall. It gives you a safe working platform, as well as your handrail and toe kick to be put in place. So they are commercially available. You can also get the guardrail boots. So these are a small little plastic piece you can bolt to the floor, and they give you the ability to place a toe board in there, as well as your handrail to be put on. Also, some other things to consider are your hole coverings, barricades for open holes, protect the workers from falls. The hole covering is required to be able to support 360 kilograms per square meter. It must be properly secured and marked with a warning sign. Building shafts must also be covered with a 2-meter high solid barrier and clearly marked. So when you look at building shafts, that's your elevators and your conveyor belt shafts and stuff like that. Those things must be covered, not with just a handrail, but a full 2-meter high covering. plywood and then secured properly, put in place. Now we'll look at two different pieces of equipment, or a few different pieces of equipment when it comes to ladders and scaffolding on site. So ladders are kind of the most common thing you're going to see on construction sites. There's a few different types of ladders that you will see. You're going to see an extension ladders, you're going to see step ladders, and you're going to see construction ladders. Okay, a construction ladder means a ladder that is built on a work site. There are very special requirements on their design and construction in the regulation. So if you are building a construction ladder, make sure you're referring to legislative requirements, as well as how to set that up. Setting up a step ladder is very crucial in ensuring workers are capable of using them safely. Okay, so a few helpful tips when setting up extension ladders. Inspect your ladder before setting it up. Look for any bends, loose rivets, safety decals that might be missing or worn off, and make sure the feet are planted and secured on the ground properly. Extension ladders should also be set up at a 4-to-1 slope. So for every 1 foot from the wall to every 4 foot of ladder, as you can see on the diagram here, as well as it must be 3 feet above the top landing that you're going to be accessing from that ladder. Ladders must be secured against accidental movement. The best practice is to tie the ladder off securely at the top and bottom of the ladder, and also refer to manufacturer's specifications for the specific design of that ladder. Are there any electrical hazards? If there are, avoid using the ladder in that area. Try and relocate that ladder to a safer designation as means of access. Are you blocking any doorways? Okay. So never set a ladder up in a doorway. If it's set up in the doorway, somebody flings that door open, they're going to hit that ladder and you're going to take a tumble from a height. So a 2-section extension ladder must have 3 foot of overlap, so it cannot fold inwards. That's very important, having that 3 foot of overlap on those extension ladders. Is the ladder set up on secure ground? And are you using the proper rated ladder for the task? So each ladder is going to have its own ratings. You got electrical ladders, you have wood ladders, you have aluminum ladders. There's all sorts of ladders out there, as well as weight restrictions, which is very important. Being a big guy like I am, I need to look at that stuff. I can't just grab a little tiny step ladder and use it. I got to make sure that that ladder is going to support my weight. I am a journeyman scaffolder by trade, so I learned this throughout my career in scaffolding and whatnot, and weight restrictions was very important. I had to be conscious about that. Nothing to be ashamed of. You must do it. Your life is in your hands at that point when it comes to fall protection. So moving a little bit more on ladder safety, there are several practices that make ascending and descending the work off of and working off them safely. Okay, ensure that 3 points of contact are maintained at all times while climbing up and down that ladder. While working off a portable step ladder, ensure that you're standing no higher than the last two rungs. Okay, so ideally the third last step on that ladder is high as you can go. With that, ensuring that if you are using your hands for working, you're keeping your torso in line with the ladder, as well as if your belly button's touching the ladder and your hips are between that ladder and you rest your hips on that ladder, that your hips are now considered your third point of contact, giving you the ability to use your hands while working. But like I said, keeping yourself within the parameters of your ladder. Carrying tools and supplies up the ladder will prevent you from maintaining 3 points of contact. So when you do have to carry stuff up a ladder, don't. Utilize a rope and a bucket. Have people in place that can help you do this stuff properly and safely. Do not carry stuff up the ladder at any way possible. And do not use a folding step ladder in place of an extension ladder. This is something we see all the time on residential construction sites, where they'll take a folding ladder and they'll set it up outside the house. It is not designed to do that. Those legs can kick out from underneath you, sending you falling to the ground. So again, placing and choosing the proper ladder for the task it's key. So moving into scaffolds, scaffolding is a huge aspect of residential construction. This stuff is amazing. It speeds up the process for a lot of contractors. But understanding your scaffolding and understanding how to use it is crucial. There is training that should be maintained and taken before using scaffolding, as well as referring to the manufacturer's specifications on how to set this stuff up. A few different types of scaffolds that you can potentially see on residential construction sites are your frame scaffolding, which is the blue ones in the picture. Then you move into system scaffoldings, which is the top right scaffold. And then you look at the bottom right scaffold, and that is tube and clamp scaffolding. They're very common in residential construction, as well as pump jack scaffolding. A lot of times siders and people like that, people installing, contractors installing windows and stuff, they'll utilize pump jack scaffolding as well. Although scaffolding is very common in residential sites, there are risks associated with them all, okay? So just to discuss a few requirements, scaffolding needs to be erected by a qualified, competent person, and it also needs to be inspected daily. Most common equipment is scaffolding has weight limits, okay? Weight limits for people and material and the equipment on it, okay? The specifics of the system must be adhered to. So whatever manufacturer specification states, you must stay within those guidelines as well as referring to your legislative requirements. One example is when a scaffold is covered in hoarding, an employer or contractor should ensure that all scaffold components and tie-ins are adequate to support the load that may be placed on the scaffold in the result of wind or weather conditions. So a lot of people don't know that. They just wrap a scaffold in hoarding and they don't tie it in at any points. You've now just created a big kite of scaffolding. And as you can see in these pictures, that's a good possibility of what happened here. They wrapped this scaffold in hoarding, and all it takes is a wind to get in behind that hoarding, and that scaffold is gone like popsicle sticks. It'll just take off with the wind. So ensuring that there's adequate tie-ins and all the components are supported properly for their loads, and as well as, like I said, you're trained in the use and following manufacturer specifications for scaffolding. Regulations and responsibilities. Employers are responsible to ensure the safety of their workers when working at heights. They are also responsible to ensure that workers are trained and aware of the risk associated with the tasks being performed, okay? All work parties, they have shared responsibilities to ensure hazards are identified and control strategies are put in place, okay? So when items are deficient, good communication between subcontractors and general contractors are important to mitigate the risks on site. So communication is key. If we look at section 116, protection against falling, states that an employer or contractor shall ensure that a worker uses a fall protection system when a worker may fall 3 meters or more, so 10 feet. Or there is a possibility of if a worker falls less than 3 meters to be injured. Okay, so if there's any protrusions or any hazards less than 3 meters while that worker is working at heights, you should have some sort of fall protection in place. So what does this mean in the workplace? Employers need to ensure that the work is planned, adequately supervised, and supervisors are trained in the use of their fall protection equipment. Okay, so ensuring that equipment such as ladders and scaffolds are maintained and safe for use. Okay, so then that's when we come down to your hazard identification and controls and that hazard assessment process. You're going to talk about this stuff while you're conducting that hazard assessment, and then coordinating with everybody about the controls so everybody has their input in those controls to keep them safe. And again, like I said, PPE is your last line of defense. So with that being said, it is also the most common method used to protect workers on residential sites. So ideally, they should be using using other methods of control. However, this is not always possible. There are many variations of fall arrest systems out there. Workers must be trained on their use and limitations. So like I said, each piece of equipment does have certain limitations, and knowing those is important. As well as calculating your clearance distances. One of the potential hazards with this system is bottoming out. So if you fall and you have a 10-foot roof and you've got 15 feet of rope, you're going to hit the ground. So to prevent this, we need to calculate the clearance distances. For that, we have clearance distance. This is the calculation is very important to the worker to know in order to ensure that in the event of a fall happens, their worker will not come in contact with the ground or an object below. You can also see in this illustration, a worker using an overhead anchor point is still requires over 18 feet of clearance with the anchor point to the surface below. So that's great. Knowing your clearance distances and understanding how to utilize them and calculate them, very important to that. Fall arrest equipment. So when selecting equipment for the job, there's quite a few options out there, as we covered already. But when we look at the fall arrest equipment, there's 3 common areas that you need to look at. So A, you have your anchor points. B, you have your harness worn by the worker, okay? And then C, you have your connecting linkages such as your lifelines, your lanyards, your self-retracting lanyards, things like that. What's gonna arrest you in a fall or keep you in that control zone so you can't get to the edge to fall. The anchor point that a worker ties off to must have enough strength to withstand a fall. Okay, so what that looks like in OH&S regulations, it dictates that an anchor point must have a breaking strength of at least 22.2 kilonewtons or 5,000 pounds if used in a fall arrest situation. Okay, so what that looks like in residential wood framing construction, a 5,000 pound anchor point is not always possible. Obviously, you're tying off to wood and you're tying off to potentially 2x4s and 2x6s. In these cases, it is best to use a travel restraint system when you can. This will prevent a worker from falling to getting to a point that they can fall. And to be rated to withstand, this anchor point must withstand up to 2,000 pounds of if a permanent installation, and 800 pounds for a temporary installation. So greatly less pounds to be put towards that anchor point if you go with a temporary travel restraint compared to a anchor point fall arrest, which is at 5,000 pounds. Temporary installation of a travel restraint is only 800 pounds. But I can't emphasize enough that 800 pounds is temporary and it's for travel restraint, not fall arrest. Okay. A person must assess what materials can withstand the force and utilize the proper anchor points for the job. So be sure to check the specifications and breaking strengths of the anchor points, as fall arrest and travel restraint requirements may not be interchangeable, okay? There are many different anchor points available. Obviously, as we see in these pictures, the red one is going to be used as a construction tie-off point. So you're going to put that anchor point on the top of your trusses or whatever material you feel or that can rate that 5,000 pounds of force. You're going to utilize that one. And then the one to the right, that's more of a permanent anchor point that you'll see on new houses, where they'll keep that anchor point on there for the homeowner to use. Okay. Anchors must be installed according to manufacturer specifications and cannot be simply put on the roof with roof nails when 3-inch screws are required and expected to withstand a fall. Okay. Common connection linkages, as I talked earlier, you need that connecting linkage between your anchor point and your harness. So some different ideas you can use are the rope grab and lifeline systems, self-retracting devices, and shock absorbing lanyards and fixed length lanyards. Okay, so on the first left picture, that gentleman there is using a lifeline. That's most common with roofers and people working on residential roofs. Then you look to the right there, and you'll see there's actually a dual purpose or a dual worker lifeline set up there. And then you move into the self-retracting lanyards, and then of course your shock absorbing lanyards, the yellow lanyard there. Then we move into harnesses. When it comes to harnesses, we really want to look at the fit, care, and use of this harness, as well as the training. These devices are to be maintained as per manufacturer's recommendations and as per legislation. The legislation states that the worker must be trained in their specific fit, care, and use. So when we talk about fit, the proper fit of your fall protection equipment is very important in how it will perform in the event it is utilized in a fall. If your harness does not fit properly, it can result in extreme bodily damage or worse. Your harness should fit like a snug winter jacket. The harness should be, you should look at the weight ratings of that harness and make sure it's correct for the user's weight, and as well as taking into consideration that worker's clothes, the tools that they have on, if they have tools on them, all sorts of stuff like that. Some guys walk around with an added 50 to 60 pounds of tools on them. That could greatly affect how that harness is going to perform, okay? Then we look at the care. Like any PPE, fall protection should be formally inspected as per manufacturer's specifications. And it's a good idea to visually check that harness before each use. And then knowing how your fall protection equipment works and how it is used in the proper way is very important. You must follow manufacturer's recommendations again, as well as your company's safe job practices and safe job procedures when utilizing and using your equipment. Equipment inspections. Each piece of fall protection will have specific guidelines on how often it must be inspected, as well as when it must be recertified by a competent person. So when we look at the inspection process of our fall protection equipment, we're looking at the condition of the webbing. Okay, how does that webbing look? Is it burnt? Is it tore? Is it frayed? Is there anything wrong with it? Has anybody colored on it? That seems to be a thing where you'll see, oh, I wrote my name on it with a Sharpie. That is not a good practice. The chemicals in that pen can break down that harness and that webbing and that fall protection equipment. So that's not ideal at all. Are all the tags in place? Okay, so can you read all the information about that harness? Are all the clasps, buckles, and metal components in good working order? Are they rust free? Are they free from cracks? Has the lanyard been used improperly, or has it been used in a fall arrest situation? So check for signs of particular partial or full deployment. This can be tagged. This can be a tag that might be popped out or a visual indication on the lanyard. Okay, so some lanyards you'll actually see. I know on self-retracting lanyards, if it's been in a fall, some areas on that will show a little red line, and that's how you can tell if it's been put in used in a fall arrest situation. Or if you look at some lanyards and they state that they're a 5-foot lanyard, and then you hold that lanyard up in front of you and it's 7 feet long, well, that's not right. That lanyard has clearly been used in a fall arrest situation or even improperly used. Okay, so you know, you might see a lanyard in the back of your work truck. It's not ideal to use that lanyard to pull somebody out with their truck. That's not what that's designed for. It's not just a random piece of rope to use. This is used for your safety and your well-being, for your fall protection. And is your equipment the proper for your task at hand? Okay, so again, like I said, assessing and evaluating your fall protection to make sure that you have the proper stuff in place to keep you safe. So then regulation 116.1 states that an employer or contractor shall develop a written fall protection plan where a worker may fall 3 meters or more and where workers are not protected by a guardrail. Okay, so some aspects of that fall protection plan, you know, the hazards associated on the work site. Okay, and then we look at the fall protection system to be used at the work site. Then we see the procedures used to assemble, maintain, inspect, use, and disassemble the fall protection system, and the rescue procedures to be used if the worker falls and is suspended by a personal fall arrest system and needs to be rescued. Okay, these plans also must be readily available on the job site and specified to the site and specific to the site and its hazards. Okay, workers have to be trained in the fall protection plan prior to working at heights, as well as the SCSA does have fall protection plan samples and as complement of the advisors to help customize these documents as needed for the specific company. Okay, so if you need any help developing these plans, there is set guidelines like I just listed in regulations as to what is supposed to be on these plans. If you have any questions or concerns, please get a hold of an advisor at the SCSA and we'd be glad to help you out with that. In conclusion, the residential industry faces many challenges to protect their workers on site. However, their proper training and information, the degree of risk can be greatly reduced or eliminated. So good communication in the planning phase of the job can set up for success for all contractors. Okay, so discussing the safety requirements on each phase of the build, Determine the safety requirements in each, determine the best controls to use to maximize productivity while ensuring work safety for other contractors on site. Okay. Planning ahead can ensure the work is completed on time and on budget with zero injuries. Very important. Involve your workers. Let them know that their safety is important. Ask for their input, listen to them and their concerns, and hold them accountable. Okay, give them the chance to talk. Give them the ability to speak their concerns, even not only their concerns, but if they have a good idea, listen to them. Okay, everybody's voice matters, especially when it comes to safety. The SCSA advisors are available to assist companies in understanding the regulations and requirements around protecting their workers at heights. Again, thank you again. And one last thing, safety doesn't stop at work. Okay, we need to take this stuff home at the end of the day as well. You know, for example, we need to set, you know, good examples for our children and young workers coming up in the trades. So important. It all starts with us, and then it moves down the chain. You know, if you have a neighbor watching you, or you have your young, you know, niece or nephew or family member watching you, and they see you working at heights not tied off, they think that's the norm. They think that that's okay. So when they get on a job site, and let's say maybe, you know, the contractor's ill-informed or whatever it might be, they're just going to go ahead and perform that work, not knowing what the proper way to do that and what, you know, how to keep them safe. So when working at home, ensuring that we're keeping and doing the stuff safely at home, as well as doing it at work. Become a positive example and not a statistic.